这怎么弄？你用就是让我们用那个翻译啊。
Okay, 早上好。Good morning. Feel like I'm, good morning. Yes, it's my check on the pulse, whether or not the caffeine has yet entered your bloodstream. Good morning and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. I think most of you are old hats coming to the center, but because we are being webcast, I like letting people in webcast land also know, in case they're new to the Wilson Center, that the Wilson Center was created in 1968 by Congress as a memorial to our 28th president, who was both a policymaker and a scholar. And in his spirit, our mission here at the Wilson Center is to bring together government, NGO, business, and researchers to discuss foreign policy issues. We are, in essence, a foreign policy forum. I direct the China Environment Forum. I've been doing that for the last 8 years, so it's my lucky year. Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. And but the China Environment Forum has existed for 10 years, so it's kind of an auspicious kind of year on two levels. So for 10 years, we've been bringing together U.S., Chinese, and other Asian government, NGO, business researchers, lawyers, who all are focused on environmental issues in China. And I love my job, in great part, particularly because I've gotten to know a lot of the NGO community and a lot of grassroots activists in many sectors in China. And it's, while we hear a lot of stories about the environmental woes in China, getting to know people like that we have here on the panel today, it makes me feel optimistic about the potential for change in China. As many of you know, being longtime China watchers, that the environment has been an area of a lot of, I think, political reform and progressiveness in China. And some of the people up here on the panel have been leading a lot of those changes, particularly in the area of law. Today's meeting is titled Greening the Courts, China's Legal Advocates Giving Voice to Pollution Victims and the Environment. We have three very distinguished speakers. You have their bios, but let me just introduce briefly. First we have Wang Canfa, who is both a professor at the Beijing University of Politics and Law, but also his other big hat is the founder of the Center for Legal Assistance for Pollution Victims, which was founded in 1998. And for the past 3 years, in our yearly publication, we have featured, I've had authors that have written about what his organization is doing. It's an amazing organization that has helped advocacy for pollution victims, and today he is going to be talking about some of the cases, successes, and with him today is also his deputy director, Xu Kezhu, who's been working, there at the far end, who has been working since 1999 for CLAPV. Her bio is very short, but I think she's done more than she actually put in the bio, because you know you can't have 2 pages long bio, I guess. But she has also, you know, besides working for CLAPV, she also is teaching classes, working law clinics. My guess is she probably does the work of 3 people. Wang Canfa probably does the work of 4 people, because he's the director. And last but not least is Li Yanfang, who is an environmental law professor at Renmin University. But she's not an ivory tower academic. She's someone who's out in the policy trenches. She's worked to help draft a number of environmental laws in China, including the renewable energy law, circular economy law, and the energy law. Notably, those 3 are what I see as very progressive laws in China, and it's exciting that she participated in that. She also has a very strong interest in public participation in the environment and wrote a book that was published in 2004 called Public Participation in Environmental Impact Assessments. And I have to ask, was it only written in Chinese?
公众参与环境影响评价制度.
Yeah, but so that means it's only in Chinese. So only the Chinese speakers can read it, but maybe it'll be translated. Who knows? But so I'm going to stop talking because you all came here to hear them. But since our room is relatively small, I'd like to just quickly run through and have all of you just say, Yang, can you grab the microphone? Just to say your name and affiliation quite quickly. And again, because we're webcast, that's why we're a little bit linked. It's our umbilical cord is linked to the webcast, so we need to speak into the mic. So just say your name and affiliation and pass the mic quickly, and that way our speakers will know who you all are.
Alex Wong from Natural Resources Defense Council.
Isabel Sarkok, retired World Bank.
Xi Huang from New York University.
Beverly Hong Fincher from UDC. Hong Yue Bi.
Tyler Stilley, National Democratic Institute.
Dana Hale, National Wildlife Federation.
Morris Wolf, professor in international law and with the Washington Internship Program.
Michael Gordon, I'm a grassroots environmental lawyer from New Jersey.
Genealogy, U.S. government.
Helen Raphael, Resources for the Future.
Wu Fengshi, Chinese University of Hong Kong.
She came the furthest as an audience member.
Christina Larson, Washington Monthly.
Laura Blessing, Johns Hopkins University.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine Zhao, Congressional Executive Commission on China.
Justin Berner, formerly of Yuncheng University.
Deborah Seligson, U.S. Embassy in Beijing.
Lin Li, World Watch Institute.
Kate Francis, the Asia Foundation.
Roger Blobam, an agricultural consultant specializing in organic food and farming.
Steve Mills, Sierra Club.
Li Honglin, the World Bank.
Steve Wolfson, U.S. EPA Office of General Counsel.
Lewis Taylor, Environmental Law Program at the University of Maryland School of Law. We're hosting our speakers this week at an international conference on environmental clinical legal education.
Lyndon Ellis, Woodrow Wilson Center.
Okay, and also I was actually going to acknowledge you. I should have sooner. Lewis Tyler, the University of Maryland, Baltimore Law School, the fact that brought them over for the conference and kindly made travel arrangements so we could nab them. So our gratitude to the university, and also it's his individual efforts, actually. So with no more rattling on my part, I'd like to invite Wang Canfa to talk to us.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
It is my honor to have the presentation here. This is the second time to be here.
I think so, yes.
Yes. Mr. Turner is my old friend.
Yes.
Yeah, we know for many years.
Yes.
Before many years. Yeah. My topic is the litigation of the protecting environmental rights and the important role of the public participation in environmental protection. My English is not well. I only give you the outline of the not very details. If the details, it need a long time. So I have only 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Yes. I will the talk three topic. Yes. The first of all, the gap, design, and the difficulties for the public to participate in environmental protection. The second is an important role, some of the case on the litigation of the protecting environmental rights. The case is the were aided by the my center. Mm-hmm. The last question is the discussion why environmental litigation helps the public participation. The first one question. The positive role of the public participation. One of the most important successful experience in environmental protection in some of the developing countries has long been recognized as an effective mechanism to resolve environmental problems. In China and other countries, experience of the public participation in environmental protection have been introduced and the advocated for the several decades. However, they do not have the substantial right to speak on the environment protection decision. They have no opportunity to participate in, say, EIA on the major construction projects, important decision on the economic development, etc. Certainly, it is not only me who sometimes comment on this situation like this. The general people in China have the right to express their opinions through NPC. NPC means the National People's Congress. Deputies and the CPPC. It means the China People's Political Consultative Congress. The members, they have a right to impeach and the accused to the authorities for environmental violations. The units undertake projects have to ask for the opinions of the residents who may be affected. And they can also plant trees and pick up litters if they are glad to do so. We can't not deny these are public participation. But this kind of the participation, however, is very limited in scope and the effects. They are far from the public participation in the substantial sense. For the public participation mechanism, the public, first of all, should be vested the right to access environmental information. The second, the public have the right and the opportunities to express their opinions on environmental protection decision. The third, a comprehensive decision mechanism on the public participation in environmental protection should be set up. Here there are some of the cases. We can find the case can promote the public participation in environmental protection. The first one, the case is the villagers of the Donghai County, Jiangsu Province, sue two factories in Shandong Province for the damages for the polluting the Shilianghe reservoir. It is a case on the traditional area water pollution. The pollution victims in the Jiangsu province, the pollute factory in the Shandong province. The plaintiff are the 97 farmers in the Jiangsu province. The defendants are the two factories in Shandong province. One is the paper factory, another is the chemical factory. In this case, the direct economic loss amount to $1.4 million. The US dollar 0.77 million of this belong to 97 farmers. Other is the natural fish loss, which belong to the nation. Yeah, it is the public property. Yeah, the farmers at last my center aid the pollution victims. 97 farmers. We win this case, At last, the farmers got the compensation of the US dollar 0.77 million, and the reservoir water has become to be better via litigation of the CLAPV's legal aid. It's very simple.
What year was that? What year did that case win? It
began at 2002.
Okay.
2001. Yeah.
Okay.
The water, the pollution water. It's the fish. Okay. You know. With the water with the investigate.
Hey, there you are.
Yeah.
He's not just in the courtroom. He's on the boat.
Do the investigation for this.
Another case is happened in Beijing. The Beijing residents, 182 citizens, sued the Beijing Municipal Urban Planning Committee for the illegal issuance of the permit. It is the administrative litigation of the environment. The plaintiffs are 182 citizens in Beijing in the Panjiayuan Nanli. They all is the very poor workers. Yeah. The defendant is the Beijing Plan Committee. It has a strong power in the local government. You know, any building will built it by they have to the permit from the plan committee. So sometimes the court afraid of them. Because if the court built the building, the office building, they are asked for the permission from the plan committee. So if you sue the plan committee, it's very difficult. Yeah. The third parties are the two institutes of the Ministry of the Health. The defendant issued a construction permit of the building and animal laboratory to the third party. The laboratory will produce air pollution and disease. The 182 citizens appealed to the Beijing government, but the government rejected the appeal. The citizens asked my center to help them. We aid them to court. At last we win this case. The plan committee released the permit. Yeah.
This is very significant, you guys.
Yeah,
the planning commission backed down. That's
it is the first one, the successful administrative case in Beijing to sue plan committee. The third case is the class action. The 1,721 people in Pingnan County, Fujian Province, sue Rongping Chemical Factory for the damage for air pollution. It is a civil litigation on the air pollution. The plaintiffs asked a lot of the farmers near to the factory. The defendant is the biggest chemical factory of the potassium chlorate in Asia.
Yeah.
Chlorate, yes.
Nasty stuff, just nasty.
Yeah.
Just say nasty stuff, yeah.
Its air pollution caused the forest and the crop died and some people sickened. You can see the picture, next picture. This is a that is a factory.
Next slide.
Yeah, next slide. Yeah, it's the bumbo. Bumbo. It's a die. The tree died. The people make money for litigation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The lawyers help them. In the super court in the Fuzhou. The factory can't afford the 1/4 the county finance each year. The county for the local government,
it's a major tax.
Local government protect this factory from the punishment. The litigation met a lot of difficulties. At last, the plaintiffs won the case under my center's help. The case was elected as one of the 10 most effective litigations in 2005 in China. The plaintiffs established an environmental NGO after the case had been finished. This case, you can find if let the pollution victim to court, they will actively to take part in environmental protection. Now we will discuss why environmental rights litigation can promote the public participation. I think it's the main ideas. As a legal right to take legal action to protect the environment are supported by the law. The second point, the environmental litigation is closely related to the public interest and the public's willing to participate in the process. The third, the environmental litigation is closely related to the public and I think the pollution victims avoid unnecessary risk, and the social stability is maintained through the environmental litigation. We can see from the currently important problem in environmental litigation is that some of the cases are not decided according to law. The victim, as the plaintiff, lost the suit for the some consideration of others than the law itself, and for some pressure on the court. Otherwise, the victims should have won the case. As a result, some victims lost the confidence to legal procedures. This issue of the judicial equity should be paid enough attention by the whole society. If the equity was challenged, the public participation will become under the idle talk. And the trust to the law would also fall into a crisis in the whole society. Fine, that's all.
That's it?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Very much. Thank you. And what we'll do is we'll move on to the next presentation, and there will be, I marched them through their presentation so we can have more time for discussion. And I think that, there's, as I know, some on his case, on the Pingnan case, we actually had we have a box on that case in our most recent publication, written by the NGO that was created, which really CLAPV really helped empower. So, more details. Xu Kezhu, I'd like to invite you to tell us more.
Thank you, Ms. Dr. Jennifer Turner. I'm very honored to come here to have a discussion and to introduce our cases in our center. And 2 years ago, I come here to do the presentation, introduce some cases, and I'm come here, so I'm very happy to come here again. Today, I focused on the damage to health resulted from environmental pollution has attracted more and more attention from our government this year. So I choose the topic, yes. So to protect the rise in health damage resulted from environmental pollution is more difficult than to protect the property rights in a more sense. And the important, the urgent, and the challenging requirement of protection environmental rights decided that we have to devote more and more time and energy in finding out how the issues come into being and how to prevent the issues from occurring. So, and I have to work out as soon as possible solution to the exacting issues as well. So I choose this the topic today. And our center, since in 1999, we started the outline for the pollution victims, and we have resolved many cases. Since 1999, we have provided legal aid for 98 typical and important cases. Among these 98 cases, 20 cases involved health damages caused by pollution, and 9 cases involved both health and property damage caused by pollution. Yet, so I did the classification of the 26 health damage cases caused by pollution. There are 9 cases is air pollution, and 6 cases about water pollution, and 6 cases for noise pollution, and there are some others pollution cases. So the total cases involve the health damages. The 35 health damages cases, we have finished 19 cases. And another one did not finish, and some cases in the proceeding of the case, yes. between the 19 cases, 12 cases we win. We win the case, and some the pollution victim get the compensation, and all some the factory have stopped work. And but some cases were lost, and many cases were not many cases in the investigation or in the proceeding we meet many difficulties and meet many challenges to provide the environmental rights. So that's the case happened in Tangshan City in Hebei Province. That's a case that is about 118 residents sued Tangshan Coal Oven plant. That's the plant is a biggest factory in that city. Is but is site very near to the residents. The residents have been suffering from the air pollution since July 1996. The SO2 and dust and others, the pollutants discharged from the plant have made more than 20,000 people's residents suffering from the all kinds of various respiratory diseases and the skin diseases. And in that areas, some girls that the residents, they dare not wear skirts and short sleeves in the summer because very serious pollutants. They will hurt their skins. So, and incidence of the cancer in that areas has kept on ascending. You look for this the picture. The building is for residents, but very near there's the factory. The most areas is only 20 meters, so it's very serious pollutants. That's the suit is very difficult to sue the plant, but after 5 years we win the case finally, and now the factory have stopped, and but it's very difficult. The first trial he refused our appeal. And then we appeal to the upper court, and the upper court said, yes, the first trial made the mistake, so we return to the primary court, and then we get more evidence for against the factory, and then okay, it's very difficult, but we win. So that's the case, and that's some two clients with words we represent this case. That's a case happened in Zhejiang province in the Leqing city. That's the factory is product the battery, so they are very water pollution and air pollution revolve the lead. Oh, okay. But that's 2 months ago. I did the investigation, but did not to suit her yet. And that the case happened in Wangcheng County in Changsha, near Changsha City in Hunan province. Is there the water pollution and air pollution? Yes, there's very poor equipment of environment, and the sub equipment of water control. But I think it could be used. It could be used. As the picture is made by myself. But in that cases, in the environmental EIA of this case, they did not any water flows to the river. They think they can have a very good equipment to can control the pollutants. But I asked them how to control this, water. It's very simple and very poor, the equipment. It doesn't to use it. So I think there are many serious water pollution yet. So that's the factory is set near the Xiangjiang River. It's near the Xiangjiang River. We can show we can look the paper of the water pollution. The paper pollution is something have the it's poor. It's very poor. So many pollutants into the river. Oh. Oh, water picture.
Back to the picture. Sorry.
No. Oh, I'm sorry. It's so big. Sorry, in picture. Show the picture. Oh, maybe I can use this one. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Our little pointer thing wasn't happy today. Technology doesn't like us sometimes.
Yes. There's some people to have the skin because they use the water from the river. That's the poor equipment of control the water. Yeah. And yes, control the pollution. Yes. It's very poor and very simple. Yes. So what I do a many investigation to the cases. So I think there are many reasons and many causes of damage to health. There are many reasons. First, I think the government a lack of consciousness of environmental protection in approving projects. Because in China we have the legislation of environmental law about EIA, but some project was permitted by the local government. But if the local government did not have the consciousness of environmental protection, so that's the accident will happen. And another reason, I think there are no environmental protection facility at the beginning of the oh, I'm sorry. I can use the next one. At the beginning of the establishment of the factories, for those enterprises who are the manpower of local economic development, they are allowed to discharge pollutants without any limitation. And another reason is about environmental agency are not strong enough in supervision and management. They are filtered to enforcement or weak implementation of the regulation, and they are filtered to play the role as the environmental supervisor leader to pollution. Yeah, okay. And another reason is about local villagers a lack of knowledge of environmental protection. They did not see the doctors when they are ill because they are very poor, and there are a lack of a hospital to do that. They did not have many to look for it. So they did not realize the potential damage that pollution might bring to their health. It was too late sometimes when some villagers realize their sickness and they do not have money for cure. And another reason is about still a lack of legal system of compensation to environmental pollution damages in China. And we are short of standards and foundation of evaluating the health damage resulted from environmental pollutions. So there are some the challenge and the obstacles to protect environmental rights in China now. I think the first biggest the challenge is Environmental Protection Bureau cannot provide correct pollution information because there's no regulation on the environmental information. Because for the public or for the pollution victims, they cannot get the real of the information about their environment. And another challenge is that there are hardly medical research organizations and medical experts in the environmental rights protection by NGOs. There is a lack of examination and recognition of health damage by pollution due to the lack of required capital and human resources. Just like our NGOs, we have a network of lawyers, but we only a few experts and almost no. So it's difficult for us to do that case. And another challenge is it's hard to collect evidence to prove the cause between the pollution and the health damages. That's very difficult to do that. And I think how to change the situation and how can we do and what we should do that. I think the first to strengthen the implementation or the enforcement of environmental law and to accelerate the enforcement of current environmental laws by taking various measures and methods. Our center's mission is to promote the enforcement of environmental law in China. And another measure is to rigorously to enforce the liability of enterprises and to force the enterprises to undertake the damage compensation via environmental lawsuit. So for losses that already occurred from the pollution. And another is to bolster the consciousness of the public and to encourage environmental NGOs and the public to take part in monitoring the enforcement of environmental laws. So, and another measure, I think, to establish a pre-sale organization for health damage result from environmental pollution. And another is to improve the legal system construction in environment and health. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And we will be posting these PowerPoints online as well as doing a summary. So just so you know, in case you can't write really fast. And I think we're going to slip right into Li Yanfang.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to talk about the public participation in environmental protection and the legal system to protect the environmental public interest in China. My topic is the necessity of establishing an administrative litigation for environmental public interest in China. Views from the case of Wang Canfa. I remember the last fall we have a discussion of Wang Canfa here, but I also participated in a forum. The difference is the last time I'm a listener and today I'm a speaker. So I think maybe somebody can remember that case. Today I will address the three aspects. The first is the details of the case. The second is the legislative limits in protecting public interest in China as evidenced by this case. The third is the necessity of establishing environmental and administrative public interest litigation in China. First is the details of the case. The case is about two 220 kilowatts and 110 kilowatts electricity transmission tower was located in the public greenbelt of Beiwangjiayuan residential area. The residents complained to the Beijing Environmental Protection Bureau, claimed that electromagnetic radiation will cause damage to the health and property. BEPB investigated and found that the project construction company did not perform the environmental impact assessment. On June 22nd, 2000, the BEPB ordered the construction company to shut down the project and to do environmental impact assessment. On August 30, 2004, BEPB hosted a hearing on environmental impact assessment, and on September 6, 2004, BEPB approved the project's environmental impact assessment. But the residents thought that the BEPB's decision was not correct, so they applied for administrative reconsideration to the Chinese State Environmental Protection Administration and to Beijing municipal government, but both of them rejected the claim. So the residents look for another way to protect their right. Until the hearing of August 30, 2004, the residents of the Beiwangjiayuan learned that the project was carried out under the permit for construction projects, and the permit was issued by the Beijing Municipal Commission of Urban Planning. So the residents filed administrative litigation in Haidian District People's Court of Beijing, claimed the Beijing Municipal Commission of Urban Planning violated the law, and its administration action of issued permit infringed on their property and personal rights. They required the court cancel the permit for the project. But the court dismissed the case. The court held that the residents have no standing for this case because the residents are not able to prove the material interest between them and the administrative action. So the residents appealed to Beijing #1 Intermediate People's Court. The court held that the judgment of the lower court was correct, and they seek the claim of the residents was groundless, and the relationship between the electromagnetic radiation and the injury to the health and property is asserted and present. So this is the details of the case. The second issue is the legislative limits in protecting the public interest in China. I think we have three problems. The first is litigation protection. The public interest are excluded from judicial review. The second is the judicial review can be undertaken only if the damages caused by administrative action were provable, which require high level of causation. The third is the abstract administrative action is not in the extent of administrative litigation. in this case of Beiwang Jiayuan, the endangered interests are not just to the residents of Beiwang Jiayuan, but also to the general public, because this electricity transmission project goes through the Summer Palace and Beiwang Forest Park. So I think the project also affected the natural landscape and historic sites, going beyond the private interest of the residents. Concerning the judicial review would be taken only if the damage was proved. We have a principle of provision in our environmental law. According to this principle, damage indicates not only the actual loss, but also potential loss. Not only health and property loss, but also another form's loss, aesthetic damage and damage to historic sites and natural landscapes. A provable liability does not mean that the damage doesn't exist. But in China, the practice in China, the court did not acknowledge that the administrative actions liability in the violation of plaintiffs' rights. They also think the damage must be strictly related to the property loss and health damage if the administrative actions endanger damage. They also require high level of causation. Another problem is abstractive administrative action is precluded from judicial review. I think it's a big problem because in China, many types of public interest are infringed by abstract administrative actions. So the last part is the necessity of establishing environmental administrative public interest. Because of the severe pollution in China, just like the two professors showed us, and maybe lot of people knows that we have a lot of serious pollution in China, just like Songhuajiang River. And the Tuojiang River was polluted very, very severe. So in China, the scholars suggest we should establish environmental administrative public interest litigation, and representatives of NPC and members of the National Committee of the CPPCC, they also suggest we should establish this legal system, and these suggestions got support from the State Council of the China. So recently we have made some achievements in this area. The amendment of a civil procedure law of PRC, the first draft has been finished by a research group led by Jiang Wei, a very, very famous professor of Renmin University of China. Our university is professor of our university. In this draft, the environmental civil public interest action was specifically stated. Now we should do is to establish administrative litigation to protect environmental public interest. I think we should make 3 improvements. The first, the extent. Second is plaintiff's standing. Last is damage and proof. Concerning the accident, we suggest that we should include administrative actions and improper abstract administrative action in the environmental and administrative public interest procedure. Maybe it's very, very important. The second is plaintiffs standing. We should give standing to environmental protection organizations, just like NGOs and the prosecutor, so that the public is able to protect their rights, just like Xu Kezhu and Wang Canfa. They are members of NGOs. The last is damages and proof. We think the potential losses should be enough under the principle of prevention of risk prevention. The defendant should be responsible for from providing proof under the principle of inverse responsibility of providing proofs. Only we do like this, the residents of plaintiff can protect the rights, because for them they are I think they are weak group. They have no method, no equipment and no measures to prove the damage. That's for today. Thank you for your attention.
Well, that was excellent, and it's a great overview. And what Yang, my intern, will have a microphone. So raise your hand. And Alex Wang has been volunteered by the group. I mean, what? 3 lawyers volunteer him. He has no choice. He's going to help interpret some of the questions, because sometimes, I mean, those of you know that those of us that are wrestle with Chinese, the Q&A is what you're scared of most. So, so when you do ask a question, please say your name and affiliation clearly. Thank you.
Sure. Morris Wolf with the Washington Internship Program, and also just returned from Hawaii, where we've been trying to defeat the super ferry. In other words, those beautiful islands are about to be invaded commercially by a so-called super ferry, which will bring damages to all the islands, as automobiles will now unload every day into places like Kauai, which totally unready highways to do it, plus plant movement, which we don't want, all kinds of problems, plus crime. People will come from Honolulu for the weekend to Kauai, rob our unlocked houses, and go home. Now, there's a major dysfunction here. Obviously, the super ferry does not benefit anyone who actually lives in Hawaii. It can only benefit commercial interests. The environmental impact statement was ignored. I mean, it clearly said this is terrible. Now, we have to wonder, how do these things get through, whether it's in China or in Hawaii or anywhere? And my perception, as both lawyer and having been involved in politics for part of my life, is that there's unfortunately both weakness and corruption in the legislature, where people are being simply bought off. And I'm wondering if that may be a problem in China, where you see this disconnect between what the people need and what they get. So is there corruption? That's the first part of my question. The second part is there intimidation on you from the government with a threat of possible jail terms or other things for actually speaking your truth, speaking truth to power? So I commend you for your courage. I'd love to know more about your take on whether there is corruption, and secondly, if you speak vociferously the truth, are you risking possible incarceration?
Or pressure, maybe.
Or pressure.
Okay.
Or jail. I mean, jail is jail, okay? Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a real thing, and that can scare people off many public interest projects, as it has done in Russia and other places. So, and even as Martin Luther King will tell you, if you were here, it can scare people off civil rights movements in the United States.
Okay. Yeah, turn on the bottom, yeah. There's a switch on the bottom, hon. There you go. Turn on.
他刚才提了一个案子，就是他刚才去华裔那边有个所谓的 super ferry， 好像是运一个船，就是运车从一个岛运到另外一个岛，然后就说那个项目对那个环境有不良的影响，可是他认为没通过这环评，也他认为就那个项目仅就是对那个商业利益有好处，可是可能对公众利益没什么好处。有些那个不良的影响，他是问有2个问题，一就是在中国这种项目有没有这腐败问题，比如说就是政府或者就是批这项目的人可能有些只在保护一些就是商业方面的利益，然后第2个问题就是他说你们办这些案子有没有什么威胁，就是有没有政府或者其他那个企业家或者什么会不会来打击你们或者怎么样？
你还翻译，我要是用那个什么说，就可能。
你可以翻译他，你可以翻译他。他们2个你们可以自己说英文，对不对？
那个就是腐败的问题，可能会有，就是在一些那个项目的审批当中，因为凡是有权利的时候，权力缺乏监督，它就会产生那个腐败。而因为现中国在项目审批上透明度还不高，所以呢，腐败可能会有。但是呢，中国那个打击腐败的力度也是很强的。你看，有一些人可能因为腐败都被枪毙了，就都被判死刑了。
He said on the issue of corruption, there is definitely the possibility of corruption. The process often has low transparency. These approval processes often have low transparency, but there's also, on the other hand, there's strong efforts to attack corruption. You'll see some people who are actually executed for corruption.
但是像这样的问题呢，就是一个有污染的项目或者对环境有破坏的项目被批准呢，更多的是地方政府考虑到的经济利益，可能还最多的不是个人的腐败问题。
The more common problem is probably local protectionism of governments approving projects because there's commercial interest rather than kind of the corruption you may be thinking about.
关于第2个问题，就是像我们支持污染受害者的诉讼会不会受到这个威胁的问题，但是直接到我们那个中心到我们的办公的地方去威胁我们的还基本上还没有。
With respect to kind of threats or risks, in terms of actual, someone coming to their center and threatening them or attacking them, that has not happened.
但是呢，如果我们到现场去调查案件去，或者进到工厂里头，就有可能会受到威胁。比如像那个徐教授和阿莱斯王就曾经在河北被围困到一个工厂里，那个就要受到威胁，要挨打。
But he said when you do on-site investigations, there's always the risk of kind of thuggery or being things happening. And he raised the example. Actually, Professor Xu and I were. I went to do an investigation with Professor Xu and some of their clinic students. We were actually locked in a factory for an afternoon, and threatened with bricks and a lot of pushing and shoving. So.
还好，当我们向公安部门，当我们向公安部门报警以后，公安部门那个把他们救了出来。
In that particular instance, we had called the Chinese equivalent of 911, and eventually, after several hours, the public security did show up, and everything turned out to be fine. It was a little bit of a frightening situation, but it ended up fine.
But you can see that Xu Kezhu, 什么都不怕, right? Not afraid of anything. She's a tough lady.
So, because in my center, I did more investigation to the pollution, the area of the pollutants happened. So, but just only 1 or 2 times to meet the risk from the factories. But I think the the risk from the factory is to meet the pollution victims. Another case happened in Hubei province, and we do the investigation. That the factory is very biggest in that province and in our China. And when we come back to Beijing, the pollution victims will be a big pressure from the factories, because the factories think if the pollution victims want to suit them, they will cancel it or were to give the risk to the pollution victims. So I think it's the more important or more serious than ourselves, because the pollution victims, they live there and they will live there. And we do the investigation, and then we come back to Beijing. But pollution victims did not move. So that's the biggest risk for pollution victims. That's the biggest challenge, because that the factory is very strong and very they fear to stop. So they give the pollution victims more dangerous. Of more risk, yes.
In the early days of your movement...
Microphone, sir, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Can you be
very
brief?
quick,
We
very
want to get
quick.
everyone's questions.
In
Thank
the
you.
early days of your movement, were some of your people identified as, quote, enemies of the state and therefore temporarily put in jail? Have any of you suffered true arrest and detention?
被贷款了没有？
No.
Did you go to- yeah.
就是那些公司。
就是你们有没有被？就你们有没有被？就是公安抓起来，就因为你做的工作。
No.
早期啊。
No. But our pollution victims could be in the jail. 就是那个，你帮我解释一下，就是像刚才我提到的湖北，那个叫湖北10手是污染受害者。我们刚调查完了以后，我们回来了，让他帮助收集证据，并且呢，就是收集更多的污染受害者是否愿意集合起来诉讼，由我们帮助他提起诉讼。那么他给我们打完电话以后，并且在准备把这些材料传真或者是复印给我们以后，被工厂的人员发现了，然后就把他给抓起来了。
这个我
对他进行威胁。
会再说，我得解释一下。
我先翻译一下，然后再。She was saying in that Hubei province case, after they had left the site, they had asked the locals to collect evidence and see if there were other parties willing to join the lawsuit. And when they called, after they called the lawyers, the factory found out and captured or somehow detained the.
当时我们去调查的时候，受害者他们表示，我们已经向政府反映了很多次，这个污染问题解决不了，那么希望通过诉讼的途径来解决。但是我们告诉他如何收集证据以后，他想收集证据，这时候政府给他压力，然后他那个再给我们的反馈意见说，我不敢再做诉讼代表人了。所以这个诉讼可能就不可能再继续下去了，因为没有老百姓愿意来做诉讼代表人，来受到那个工厂的威胁。
They had the locals had gone to the government multiple times and tried to get a resolution, but didn't get a satisfactory resolution. So when the plaintiffs in this case, they'd said they wanted to bring litigation, and they talked to the lawyers, and as they were trying to collect evidence, they were given pressure by the government, and then subsequently they had contacted the lawyers and said that they no longer wanted to try to bring litigation because of they had some pressure.
这个问题是这样的，就是怎么呢？就是一般的，就是像那些污染的工厂那些企业，他们不敢对我们怎么样？因为我们像我就是大学里的教授，我是也是完全按法律办事情，他不敢对我怎么样。但是呢，一般的当地政府对这个污染受害者的组织者，你要提起一个诉讼，总得有代表人，有组织者，往往可能会受到一些威胁。现在我们发现的几个呢，往往都是他不是以说这个污染受害者反对污染来抓你， 他是找到污染受害者有其他的错误，有其他的违法的事情。如果你不反对污染呢，我可能不抓你。但是呢，你反对污染了，我就找你其他的违法的事情，我会把你抓起来，是这样的。
So in general, nothing will happen to the professors because they're professors at a major university and they're doing everything according to law. But with the locals, often what will happen is that they aren't arrested because of opposing pollution, but the authorities will find something else that they've done and then bring charges against them for that other thing. Whereas before they had kind of caused trouble locally, the authorities ignored those violations. But then when they became kind of controversial figures, then the authorities would use these existing violations to prosecute them.
Okay, we'll go to Steve Mills and then to Mike Gordon and then to Helen and then, well, okay, we'll do you two next to each other, so. But try to be succinct because we are having interpretation, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. My name is Steve Mills. I'm with the Sierra Club, which is an environmental nonprofit here. Yeah. And thank you, Jennifer, for making this conversation happen. I want to talk a bit or ask a couple of quick questions about challenges and opportunities. I'm curious if you can characterize the area where you have had victories. Can you put it in a sector in that are you finding that you're more likely to have a win if it involves rights of pollution victims, or is it health effects of environmental pollution? If you can look back at the victories you're having, is there an area? The other question was, you mentioned a challenge in not having enough information linking pollution on pollution information, health effects. Can you talk a bit more about that and what sort of help you would need? Or clearly there have been linkages made in other countries, and I'm wondering if it's just in order to prove it in Chinese courts you need documentation in China, or can you import it from other cases? If that makes sense.
OK， 他有两个问题，第一个就是他想问一下那个，他是那个塞拉俱乐部的那个一个代表，那个他想问两个问题，一个是就是你们这些案子就是胜诉的案子，就他想了解一下，就是有没有一个特别一种案子是就是比较可能胜诉，还有就是你们认为你们这胜的案子是哪方面有没有什么特点这个案子？然后第二个问题是他想问那个刚才你们讲那个污染跟那个健康，就环境与健康这个案子有一些那个信息的问题，就是得不到信息也很难证明那个因果关系，就是他想问一下你们认为具体那个问题是什么？就是这些那个健康方面的案子，就是具体你可不可以多讲一下？你认为那个问题在哪儿？
那个我回答第一个问题吧，第二个问题由徐老师来回答。然后那个我们胜诉的案子呢，就是说从这个污染的种类上来讲，一般的就是水污染的案子比大气污染的案子容易胜诉。因为什么呢？水污染它比较固定，你说这儿排出来水就经过这儿，那么你在那儿受害。但是大气污染，排出去空气以后它不固定，所以呢谁受害它不能确定，所以呢就不容易胜诉。
In terms of, he's going to take your first question, and just in terms of the types of cases that are easier to win, they found that the water pollution cases are much easier to win than air, and it has to do with just the nature of the way the pollution comes out. The air pollution, they have difficulty tracking how it actually affects people, and with the water pollution, they can look at the emissions places and kind of track it down the river.
那么从案件胜诉的地区上来讲呢，越是在富裕的地区打官司，越容易受害者越容易胜诉。但是越是在贫穷的地区打官司，受害者越容易败诉。因为什么呢？因为地方政府更容易保护那个污染的工厂。
The second, in terms of geographical distribution of the cases, the rich areas are the places where it's easiest to win the cases. In the poorer areas, it's very difficult to win cases because there tends to be more protectionism in the poorer areas.
那么从这个受理案件的法院来讲， 就是越是把官司打到更高一级的法院，越容易胜诉；越是在最基层的法院，越容易败诉。
And the other aspect is the higher level of court the case is at, the easier it is to win. The closer you are to the basic level courts, the more difficult it is to win.
那么从判决案件的法官来讲，经过环境法律专门培训的法官，如果办理案件的话，这个环境案件就比较容易胜诉。但是呢，如果这个法官没有经过环境法的专门的培训，那么在有那样的法官来审理环境案件，这个环境案件就容易败诉，受害者就容易败诉。
And then with respect to the particular judges, if the judge has gone through specific environmental law training, then it tends to be easier to win the cases.
所以这是根据我们中心所办的案件的情况来总结的4个特点。
我要找一个问题，这些案子如果有媒体帮一个角色 ，Does the news media in these cases sometimes play a role?
Yeah, if the case was reported by the media, the pollution victims won't easily. Yeah, but if the case was 就是没有被媒体曝光，没有被宣传出去，这个案件受害者就容易败诉。
The ones that aren't reported as much, definitely. I can do that one. The ones that aren't reported as much obviously don't tend to win. But that leads to another question. Your center, do you work with the news media in terms of also training or teaching, informing them about these cases, or?
Yes, we have a very good relations with the media. But we
have a very good cooperation with the media, because that the media is focused on the environmental protection. So many journalists or the reporters want to do the investigation with us or with the lawyers. So they know what's the fact is that, and then to public the facts that. So. In our cases, some is lost, but some the factory have stopped. So from the character 叫什么那个统计 statistic in our center, some cases lost, but some the pollution, the environmental problem have been resolved because some the factory have stopped between the suit. So,
但是呢，就有的时候啊，媒体对于这个案件呢，一个是他不敢去报道，就我们让他那个就是给他提供资料，让他去报道，他不敢报道。再一个就是呢，那个记者采访了以后，有可能在媒体、在电视台、在报社就给压下了，就报道不出去。但有的时候记者会去采访的。
The two other problems is that sometimes they'll give information to the reporters and they'll be afraid to go report the case. Second is that even if they report it, sometimes the editors will not publish the case, the report.
And then there was the second question.
Second question, yes. I'm very happy to use the CLAPV labs because last year I visited the CLAPV lab. And I would like to learn more experiences from the CLAPV lab. Yes, because I know you have to do more environmental litigation in the United States. 就是有关他提到的 about the pollution and the environment is we lack of the information because in China 就是我们中国目前还没有那个环境信息公开法律，而且呢，中国国家环保总局呢有一个政府的规章，就是有关公害病的方面的信息呢是保密的，也就是说不允许向公众公布有关这个公害病的这个信息，因为它会考虑到它可能会引起社会的不安定或者是一些其他的那个因素。
With respect to the information right now in China, there's no environmental information law or regulations, so that's one problem. And for example, another issue is that information about public kind of health epidemics and things like that are considered state secrets, and so because of the concern of causing social unrest, so that's another problem.
比如说对工厂的来讲。
对不起，你不是说国家秘密吧？那个信息不是国家秘密。
是国家秘密。
国家秘密。
是
国家秘密。
对，就是有关公害病、健康损害方面的是目前还是国家秘密。就是说，发生了那个事件以后，那么当地的政府呢，他有义务向政府机关报告，但是当地的政府呢，不能直接向公众公开。
但是这个没有，但是这个没有一个明确的法律规定。
这是国家环保总局有一个和国家环保总局和中国的叫保密局有一个规章，
那个是在80年代。
There's an old regulation from the 80s that says that.
But I think now it's not true because I went to China last year. I got a book about epidemics of different diseases in China and different geographic distributions.
I think, but I think in general in China, we've had some other meetings talking about, the whole question of information access. It used to be that if it wasn't said otherwise, everything's a state secret, right? I'm having my lawyers here nod at me. But there have been some major cities, and I gotta be careful, I got lawyers in the room who'll correct me if I'm wrong here. But I think though that like Shanghai, Beijing, and some major cities have passed some legislation kind of like a Freedom of Information Act, we've been told. There
are about 15 cities that have passed.
Can you tell us a little bit what that means?
Guangzhou and Shanghai were the first municipalities that passed a Freedom of Information Act-like laws, and it allows people to, I believe it has requirements that the government has to automatically release certain information, but it also gives the public the right to, like the FOIA law in the States, to apply and request information, but there are certain exceptions for state secrets and a variety of other things. And I think roughly around 15 municipalities have them now, but I don't think there's much evidence on how they've been implemented. Yeah. And then there's also a national one. The State Council is also considering a draft right now.
Okay. Yang, can you give the microphone to Deborah right there, please? She had a comment, I think.
Yeah, but on the epidemics, it is indeed the case that outbreaks need to be reported up to the center, need to be confirmed, and then reported out from there. This is not actually unusual to China. This is a fairly common way to do it so that you confirm it. And remember, with some kind of health outcome, when it starts, you don't know what the cause is. You don't know whether it's an epidemic or pollution or some other cause of it. So it has to be confirmed through the system before it's reported. So that can lead to the situation that Professor Xu was talking about, that it's covered by those laws, which do restrict reporting at the local level, even though at the same time there are rules in a number of localities requiring that environmental information be reported out. And a number of cities are also talking about getting to greater detail in terms of the emissions reporting. But in no city in China is emissions reporting reported per factory, for example, which makes their job collecting information for specific cases extremely difficult. And the other problem that they face is that environmental regulations are not based on a required human health outcome, that often they're based on what is believed to be feasible, whether that's engineering feasibility or economic feasibility varies, but they're not tied directly to a human health outcome. And that's sort of if they were, I think it would make their job a lot easier, because then all they'd have to do is prove that things were not in connection with the violation. Do you want me to translate what I just said?
No.
Yes.
OK，
这短是。
所以我说有关那个传染病的那个法规，你刚刚所说的是真的，是中国的法规是地方政府不能保留，他们要报道给中央政府。实际上，这样的有关传染病的法律不只是中国的一个规定，因为你要先确定和这样的一个确定方法，很多国家都有。不是每一个国家，但是很多有。另外呢，要是我们讨论的是一个健康的一个情况，一开始你不知道是不是一个传染病，是不是因为污染，所以实际上从头你的研究要一样的，要看看是什么结果。所以那个是在传染病法，和你说的是对的，那个是只有中央政府能说能告诉人。同时地方政府在有的地方有一个，他们要报道环保的情况，他们有一些污染的指标，他们是每天都报道，但是那个都是有关地方的情况，和不是每一个工厂具体的一些信息。所以为了一个具体的案子，这个是一个很大的障碍，因为你不能从地方政府得到那个工厂的污染是多少。另外一个问题是，你们在中国那个污染的标准不是按照一个健康的结果来执行的，他们平常是按照一个可能性的，也许是经济方面的可能性，也许是工程方面的可能性，但是不是因为他们要这样的一个老百姓的健康的一个结果来选择你能污染多少。所以这个要是有那样的一个标准，实际上我觉得对你们的工作会容易一点，因为你不只要说是超过那个标准，但是因为那个标准跟健康没有具体的一个关系，你们的工作是比较难。
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I wanted to, but also interject here. Just last comment on information, then we'll go back to questions here. Is that there is an NGO, Majun. Ma Jun has his NGO, the Institute for Public and Environmental Affairs, and it's been it was reported here in the States as well that he set up a water pollution database using all government sources. So there is information out there, but he had a whole army of graduate students who went and went to different ministries, got books, and they're also working now with some Chinese NGOs to train them on actually doing their own sampling and link that with the GIS database so it would be a real time. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. Now that part is pushing the envelope a bit in China, but the initial one, he gathered up government sources, but it excited a lot of people, just the whole concept that, whoa, there's information online. And then he got a lot of criticism and critique and input on it. So it's generated a lot of talk, and now he's considering doing an air one as well. So I think the issue of information, in fact, our China Environment series we published last year is all about this issue of public participation and access to information. But I want to make sure, I really think Sierra Club and you guys need to powwow afterwards. Chat, 聊天一下, anytime. But I'm going to continue going in order. I'm going to go to Mike, and then Helen, and then you, and then Steve. Okay, it's right at the end there. Mike, raise your hand so Young-An can see you. Thank you. And try to be succinct, because again, we have interpretation, and it's going to take longer.
I'm a lawyer, so that's a challenge. But
that's a lawyer. It's a challenge.
First, I want to thank you for your presentation. Congratulate you on your wonderful work. I have been representing the victims of pollution in New Jersey for 25 years and have encountered many of the same problems that you have eloquently put forward today. In fact, just last year I completed a case for a community that suffers from what we call in the United States environmental justice problems. They're poor, they're black, they don't get justice. It took them 20 years to secure justice in the courts. We have a group of lawyers nationwide who represent pollution victims have sought compensation or worked in administrative proceedings. We would like to help. We'd like to know what we can do to work with you, to share our experiences, to share our resources. I think you've identified some of the problems that we've recognized: data, access to experts, access to judges who understand the issues. There's still corruption in the United States. There's still lack of access to the courts. We share these problems. One issue I have is the exportation of our pollution from the United States to China and other countries, and how we can hold those entities responsible. Every single case I've done in 25 years, every major pollution problem, the company knew it was causing the pollution, knew people were suffering, knew the environment was suffering, and failed to take corrective action. So I'd like to know what we can do to help and bring our attorneys in contact with your organization.
Could you identify yourself? I think
He did at the beginning. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Say it again, Mike. It's Mike Gordon.
Michael Gordon. I'm a private lawyer from New Jersey, which, as I said when I first came, is very similar to China in a lot of ways.
Well, 他是那个New Jersey 州的一个律师，他是已经他做的案子也是这种污染受害者方面的案子，让他面临的问题也跟你们讲的是很类似的。然后他说他最近在做一些那个所谓的 environmental justice 的一些案子，就是保护那些比较贫穷的或者那方面的然后那个他现在有个网络，就全国的一个这 environmental justice 律师网络，所以他想看有没有什么办法可以就是跟你们合作或者提供一些资源。I think that's general.
Great. I would like, maybe our center would like to invite the lawyer to give us a speech for our training programs for the lawyers, because each year we have the training programs for the judges and lawyers to do them how to handle the case, so how to collect the evidence. This thing we have six training. Each year have one and continue last 6 years. And these 2 years we have cooperated with the NRDC, with Alex Wang, because they have a Beijing office. So I very glad to, in the future, I more the information or more the experiences with the professor. Yes.
I often say
the lawyers. Okay.
I often say that I'm a matchmaker. So you guys can kind of like you guys can do your romancing offline here. But yeah, but okay, I'd like to have Helen. Do you know, young Helen's right there. No, but I think this is good, and also you should know Alex Wang, NRDC. Chat with them as well. They could be a resource. Helen.
When I was working, I have a very quick example of intimidation that simply never got known. When I was working at teaching at Sichuan University in 2000 and 2001, I was acquainted with a Peace Corps, a Chinese doctor who was working for the Peace Corps. And he had previously been working for a very large chemical factory just outside of Chengdu. And he had discovered that the workers in the factory were seriously impacted by the chemicals themselves and the poor protection for the workers in the factory. But of course, none of them would talk about it because they were afraid of losing their jobs. He reported the situation to his superiors, and they just hushed it up and pretended it didn't occur. And he had to transfer, in fact, to the Peace Corps, an American organization, because of the danger of just being dismissed from his position in this chemical factory. So the knowledge simply never got out, and the result was that all the workers in these dangerous factories were being harmed. Their health was being harmed.
That's a good question. Maybe wondering if they do any cases like that.
Yeah, 那个他刚才提的就是他有个见过一个案子，是一个那个化工厂，然后那个 那些工作人员知道有很明显的那个很严重的污染，可是他们不敢去报这个，因为他怕就是他讲了以后就没工作了，所以就看你们有没有类似的这种情况。
对，这样的情况肯定会有，就是说，现在在中国的一些工厂，他们有的时候是偷排污水，比如从底下管道偷偷排走，不经治理；有的时候到夜里的时候，他就那个废气就排放，你看不到他的烟囱在排放。所以呢，这种，但是他们厂里的工人应该是都知道的，但是呢，很少有自己本厂的工人到政府去举报。因为如果他会去举报，他就会失去工作，所以这确实。
担心的是这个工人他们自己生病了，他有什么有案子？你们帮助就是工人在工厂里面的工人。
这个呢，帮助工人呢，这属于两个问题，因为那个是属于劳动案件，就属于那个劳动保护方面的，不属于我们所说的这个 environment。所以呢，我们帮助的不是那些人，我们帮助的是由于受到工厂的污染的外边的人的。
Okay. Yeah. They don't deal with cases where workers are concerned about their own health. It's kind of under a different area of law, more of a labor and occupational health law.
But I do know that in Guangdong that there are some. I think at some of the university law clinics that there are cases for migrant workers, that they work with migrant workers who are working in factories. And I recall it was a few years ago I had some lawyers here and they talked about how sometimes there have been cases where, employees are complaining about health problems. But again, it's a supply and demand issue.
The regular workers would never.
But I mean the regular workers that if they complain, they do lose their jobs. And so that you've identified a major gap in the law there. Okay, I have
Jennifer, there are more lawyers doing that kind of work than this kind of work. In fact,
that's good. Yeah,
quite a few.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Yang, where's the woman right next to Steve? Can you raise your hand so she sees you? And then it'll pass on to you, Steve. So you just grab it from her politely after she's done.
Hi, 我是李红林，我是中山大学法学院本科毕业，我在中山大学法学院法律诊所工作过，所以其实我是见过你们各位的。我现在在I will translate to English later. 我现在在世界银行做一个公众参与的项目，同时我在一个独立的 NGO 叫做 Earth Day Network 世界地球日联盟，也是做公众参与和环境意识提高的项目。所以我的两个问题都是跟公众环境意识有关的。我第一个问题是，你们三位其实都直接参与到了很多法律和政策的制定和改革的过程中，同时你们对那个污染受害者的帮助也很大程度上提高了他们的环境意识，特别是农民的环境意识。那你觉得你们的工作是不是可以引起一个从下至上，从底层到中央政府方面的一个促进他们的法律和政策的改革变化呢？如果你们觉得你们的工作有这样的效果，请问你可以举出一个具体的例子，或者是说一说这样子的一个从下至上的改革是怎么样引起的呢？我第二个问题是，我知道你们夏天进行了一个为时22天的西部5省法律宣传活动，我希望你们可以稍微谈一谈你们这次活动的一些感受，比如说你们觉得东部跟西部，特别是东部发达地区跟西部贫困地区那个公众的环境意识程度是不是有明显的差别，和政府官员和法官的环境意识程度是不是有区别呢？另外，你感觉公众和官员对环境保护的 NGO 以及像你们这样的组织态度和合作的方式方面有没有区别？以及在这个过程中，如果你们可以谈一谈给你们印象最深的事情或者是故事是什么样的
Can you just translate your questions briefly, not the long intro on who you are? Okay, thank you.
So I asked two questions. First of all, is I would like to know about whether their work on providing pro bono legal aid to farmers can help to promote the bottom-up reform on legal and political system in China. And my second question is...
It's a little question. Yeah, no, 开玩笑.
It's a little question.
Yes, yes.
And my second question is about last summer they went to 5 provinces in inner western China to promote environmental law. So I would like to listen to their story about the trips.
Yeah, very good question. Yes, 你们可以看你来翻译，要不然到时候我说的不太确切。那个就是从我们中心的建立这个中心的宗旨来讲，就是通过帮助污染受害者提起诉讼的方式，来提高公众的环境意识、法律意识和维权意识，最终要促进中国环境法的执行和遵守。这是我们中心在一开始建立的时候就确定的一个宗旨。
So the mission of their center is to use litigation to promote, to basically raise public awareness and to promote rule of law and ultimately to improve environmental enforcement in China, environmental law enforcement in China.
所以呢，我们应该不是定位在一个慈善组织，不是说就帮助一下穷人就算了，我们仅仅是做一些案件做 model， 从这里边发现问题。然后来改变国家的改善国家的政策和法律。
And their cases involve poor people, typically involve poor people, but they're not just there to help these particular poor people. They're also their ultimate goal is to promote national change in terms of the laws and enforcement.
而在很大程度上，我们也确实达到了这个目的。
And they've achieved that goal in many respects.
比如像我们对法律的改变，我们在营口有一个案件，是一个风力发电的那个项目。风力发电本来是那个清洁能源，但是呢，由于它那个投资太小，它没有把这个周围的居民拆迁出去，结果这个风力发电的噪声就影响了周围居民的生活。
For example, there was a case that involved a wind power what do you call it? A wind power plant that because it didn't have enough of a budget, they didn't actually compensate people to move people away from the surroundings of the plant, and it actually had a significant effect in terms of noise and disturbance on the surrounding residents that lived around this wind power plant.
但是按照当时的那个国家的规定呢，就对于噪声的监测。必须在无风无雨无雪的天气情况下才能进行噪声监测。无风无雨无雪。
The rules were that when you monitored the noise of coming from these, it had to be in a situation where there was no wind, no snow, no rain.
但是如果没有风，它不发电，那就没有噪声了，所以呢就污染。
But in an instance, in a situation where there's no wind, there's no noise because the wind tower is not operating.
所以我们从这个案件当中发现的问题，就给国家写建议，最后是国家环保总局改变了这个规定，就是说，凡是这种风力发电的项目，必须在正常发电的情况下来监测，也就是说，在有风的情况下来监测。
So because of this case, they recognized the absurdity of that rule, and they submitted recommendations to the national government and said that you must measure the noise of these things when they're operating normally as they're meant to operate.
像再一个例子就是有一段时间就是北京市在居民的楼下建了很多的餐馆。他们你知道中餐是有很多的油烟，然后呢他们开着排风扇又有很多的噪声，所以呢就使得居民没法生活。所以那一段时间就像我们中心有很多投诉这样的案件。
是谁的餐馆？
就是那个在北京市好多居民楼下建了很多的餐馆。
In Beijing, a big problem has been kind of the smoke and the pollution coming from restaurants. Built at the first floor of a residential building or something. So they've gotten a lot of complaints in that respect, where people are complaining about the smoke and smell pollution coming from these restaurants.
那么我们就把这种情况反映给北京市环保局，在北京市制定国家大气污染防治法的实施条例的时候，里边就规定了居民楼下不得建设那个餐饮娱乐设施，就解决了这个问题。
So they talked to the Beijing Environmental Protection Bureau about this, and during the passage of regulations pursuant to the clean the air pollution prevention law, they put in a provision that restricted the construction of restaurants like this in residential areas.
还有一个更好的例子，就是我们对国家法律的 改变。比如像那个我们在办理这种环境案件过程当中，发现呢，受害者收集证据特别难，就是污染受害者收集不到受污染的那个证据。那么再一个，污染受害者的那个监测委托环保部门的监测站去监测也非常困难。然后呢，在证明因果关系的时候也非常困难。
In the area of promoting national law, they had recognized the issue of proving causation was very difficult, gathering evidence, working with these kind of third-party monitoring stations that could provide acceptable evidence for cases. That was also there were a lot of barriers to that.
所以呢，我们就针对这些环境案件处理的困难，就召开了一个国际研讨会，就是环境损害赔偿立法的国际研讨会。而这个研讨会呢，就邀请国家环保总局，邀请全国人大环资委，要求全国人大的法工委，要求最高法院和国务院法制办的这些负责立法的人员都参加这个研讨会。
So in response to that, they had an international symposium on compensation of damages in pollution cases, and they invited various people from the National People's Congress, from the State Council, from the Supreme People's Court, all the different departments in those bodies that were responsible for legislation.
那么在这个会上，我们又提出了一个环境损害赔偿立法的建议草案。
And at that meeting, they proposed a draft law on compensation for pollution victims.
对，虽然这个法律到最后没有被制定，但是呢，这个我们在这个草案里头提的一些建议被吸收到了中国的固体废物污染环境防治法当中。
That particular draft was not ultimately passed, but provisions in that draft were ultimately absorbed into the solid waste pollution prevention law.
Can I interrupt Li Yanfang? I think I want to pull her in a little bit because this is starting to get to your area of expertise in terms also that talking about he just talked about a draft law on compensating pollution victims. Are there any discussions of also, because you talked about the public interest laws? Yeah. Are there any forums or movement that you've been involved in to try to help to create the kind of laws that are needed?
有关环境公益诉讼，刚才讲到那个一些实例，是不是能推进中国有关公益诉讼方面的立法？
就是现在关于那个公益诉讼的民事立法、民事的诉讼，那现在已经有专家正在起草。我刚才讲就是有一个草案，已经对民事诉讼呢基本上没有什么大的争议啊，所以这个法律里头，这个草案里头呢已经规定了。但是现在一个最重要的就是关于公益诉讼的行政诉讼。那因为行政诉讼呢，在中国主要是要告政府的，这个呢就非常难。
So, with respect to in the civil area, there's she had mentioned earlier that there's reforms in the civil litigation law about public interest litigation, and there's not too much debate about that right now, and that draft is already in a fairly final stage. But in the area of administrative public interest litigation, there's more controversy because that involves suing the government.
But I have heard there was a woman, Zhang Shuihua, a PhD student in California, who she's doing her dissertation looking at cases where local EPBs, the local EPBs are being successfully sued for not enforcing the law, and I was kind of interested to know if you know about this and how effective this might be to bring about change. It's difficult. I mean, if you're trying to sue the county government that owns the factory, you may lose, but the fact that some EPBs are being successfully sued, I sometimes wonder if they're saying, yes, sue us. I don't know, but I'm kind of curious about this opening for pushing public interest administrative 行政诉讼。
就是行政诉讼有什么效果？就是他刚才提了，就是张雪华，就是 Stanford 大学有个研究生在博士生在研究这行政案子，然后听说他那个在研究就是在告环保局的一些案子，然后听说有一些就是成功的案子，所以就想问你们，就是你们觉得这个行政诉讼，就是你可不可以多讲一下，就行政诉讼有什么作用？现在
因为在中国政府的角色，在美国我们都知道了，美国的有公民诉讼，任何政府的任何行为都可以告，但是在中国呢，告政府呢，只是按照现行法律规定，只是对政府的具体行政行为，那么对相对人造成损失以后才可以起诉，才可以告。但是最高法院呢有一个解释，就是比这个范围呢稍加扩大，说有实质性的利害关系也可以告，这是最近的一个法律上的利害关系呢也可以告，实际上把这个范围呢扩大了一点。
She's drawing a legal, and let me. I think I understand that she was drawing the distinction between, they know that in the U.S. you can sue for a broad range of administrative actions, but in China, you are restricted to so-called kind of concrete administrative actions, like if you were someone who applied for approval of a permit, and that approval decision would be a concrete action. But the 最高法院 and the Supreme People's Court had a judicial interpretation recently that kind of expanded the scope of that a little bit by allowing people who had been affected in fact by this decision to also have standing to sue.
So again, that's why I was trying to get at some trends that could be really positive. Now,
那现在就是说在中国有很多告政府的这个环境，比如说他的政府的不作为，或者是政府有违法发放许可证造成的污染，有很多这样的官司，但是打赢的很少。王老师刚才说的那个潘家园，那是告政府具体行政行为胜诉的一个案子。
但在中国告环保局的这个案件，环保局的胜诉率在94%左右。就是那个往往告环保局那个原告都要败诉。
原告败诉不是他的
环保局的胜诉是什么？
我看
败诉率。
环保局胜诉一般的是，就是说行政诉讼就是原告人很难胜诉。
Right. So they're both raising the fact that in these administrative cases it's very difficult to win. Professor Wang raised the statistic that 90% of the time suits against environmental protection bureaus, the EPB wins in 90% of those cases.
因为比如说像北望家园这个案子，它胜诉的一个很重要的背景就是说，这个原告书，电力公司赢和规划局赢的一个很重要的背景就是这个工程呢，它是为北京市2008年办奥运会服务的。所以它这里头呢，就是有一个公共利益和个人利益关系的一个协调。
Right. So for example, the case that she talked about earlier, that transmission tower case, one of the background of that case is, you had a situation where the residents lost and the commission and the power company won, and the background was that project was a transmission line project for the Beijing 2008 Olympics. So it would be very difficult for there was kind of a public interest and private interest conflict.
对，另外呢，就是中国的环境的标准呢，相对的来说呢，也比较宽松。
And Chinese environmental standards tend to be a little bit looser than elsewhere.
That was very euphemistic. Yes.
但是我想补充一点，就是中国的环境诉讼法行政诉讼法是从89年发布的。虽然呢，刚才两位教授提到这个行政诉讼呢，在中国还有很多的困难，而且大部分行政诉讼呢会是败诉的。但是呢，通过这个行政诉讼这种方式，已经可以就是使得行政机关来改变他们的行为，或者是来督促他们履行原来没有履行就应该负有的这种职责，在这些方面呢是起到了很大的作用。
Yeah, Professor Xu is raising the point that although since you've had this administrative litigation law, although it's difficult to win the cases, very often you'll find that the case itself will push the government to take action. And you'll actually get some level of results despite actually losing the particular court case.
比如说我们中心也有一些案件是告行政机关的违法行为，就是他做出的环境影响评价报告书的审批是错误的。那么虽然这种诉讼呢被法院驳回了诉讼 起诉，因为他认为你污染受害者告行政机关，它不具有直接的法律关系。但是呢，法院的这种认识和最高法院的司法解释以及行政法学专家的这个认识呢是有距离的，就是不是完全一致的。所以这也涉及到我们国家在这个法律的执行方面，也就是在司法方面呢，还存在一些问题。
So she was pointing out that, for example, the case where you have suits against environmental protection bureaus for approval of environmental impact statements. They've commonly run into a situation where the cases are thrown out on standing for lack of standing grounds. But Professor Xu was pointing out that there's some distance between what the judges on these cases are, how they're interpreting the law, and what national government and the Supreme People's Court believe the law to be. So there's still, in implementation, there's some issues.
There's slippage. Now, I think that we're getting short on time, and I wanted to make sure that last question about CLAPV's big kind of trip out west.
Yeah. Another question is the moving legal advice for the pollution victims in Western China. 这个项目呢是去年给 NRDC 他们在中国的项目办公室来合作进行的。我们已经在中国西部的山西、陕西、甘肃、宁夏、内蒙进行了那个法律咨询。
This project that Holly just asked about was a kind of rural outreach project where actually CLAPV and NRDC had collaborated on this last summer, where we went to 5 different places. We went to Shanxi, Gansu, Ningxia, and Inner Mongolia.
那么而且呢，取得了非常好的效果。我们在这个咨询过程当中，我们还对西部的环境意识，公众的环境意识进行了调查。
Professor Wang says that he felt the results were very good. He was able to also use this trip as a way to kind of investigate the environmental situation out in these different areas.
那么我们为什么要进行这个项目呢？因为我们发现，我们虽然有一个热线电话，各个地方的人都可以把电话打给我们，我们告诉他应该怎么来维护自己的权利。但是我们也发现，我们的信息在中国西部好多污染受害者在偏僻的地方，他们不知道。
The reason that we did this project was because CLAPV has a hotline where people will call in and report problems, but they found that there are a lot of areas where they don't get calls from and people don't know about the hotline.
那么在这种情况下，他们就没法得到我们的帮助。
So in those circumstances, there's no way that they can get CLAPV's help.
另外，有些人虽然知道我们的信息，但是你知道中国西部好多地方还是很穷的。那些人，他们给我们打电话，他们要花长途电话费，那个电话费他们都付不起。所以呢，他们有的时候就给我们是打到我们的电话说啊，我放下你再给我打过去，这样呢，他才能向我们咨询问题。
I mean, some places where they're particularly poor, it's even a burden for them to pay the cost of the phone call to Beijing, and sometimes they've gotten calls where people will call and say, "Can you call me back really quickly?"
So 以呢，这样呢，我们为了帮助更多的人，我们就需要走出去，到那个最贫穷的地方、最偏僻的地方，来给他们提供法律援助。而那个地方往往环境污染和破坏都是比较严重的。
So for these reasons, it was necessary to kind of leave Beijing and go out to places where there's more serious pollution and actually take outreach to the people.
这样的那个项目呢，我们本来按我原来的设想啊，应该是有一个像那个大篷车似的，然后呢，我们可以随时停下来。如果我们中心有一个车，可以随时停下来，就可以跑到很偏僻的地方去来进行那个提供法律咨询。但是呢，由于我们没有那个车，所以我们只能坐火车，就只能走到大城市的郊区。所以呢，现在呢，我在努力争取funding，看有哪一些愿意做环保的公司，然后能够资助我们一个那个cargo， 然后呢就可以到最偏僻的地方来进行提供。
His original thinking was that he would like to have a car that for the center that he would actually drive to these locations, but they weren't able to actually secure funding for actual vehicles, so we had to take the train and travel by public transport. So he would like to ask the group if anyone knows of any companies that can provide a car. He's still vigorously looking for someone to fund a vehicle.
But it has to be a clean car. It has to be like a hybrid, environmental.
这是一个非常有意义的项目，我希望能有那个热心中国环境保护的机构能够对这个项目感兴趣。
I have a car in Hawaii if you arrange transportation.
在外有车，可是你必须自己拿到。Okay.
I can drive her.
Okay, I've got two final. I know we're going to go over time in a minute, but if Steve said he had a short question, and Xi Huang 问题短嘛。Okay, short questions.
Steve Wolfson from U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. On that, the issue we were just talking about legislative trends, I wanted to find out whether there are any helpful trends in legislation in terms of monitoring of emissions and in terms of imposing precise limits on a factory-by-factory basis.
那个他想问就是立法方面，就是立法的趋势，就是那个监测，就是每个工厂的这排放量有没有限，就立法方面有什么进展？就是关于监测一个固定的一个工厂，然后公布它那个排放的那个信息。
现在呢，就是对工厂的监测呢，那个在水污染防治法的修改当中，因为这个是我参与起草来修改的，这里边规定了，就是企业必须装这个自动的监测仪，就是它的数据可以自动的传到环保局的这个终端那个数据库里边的。
President Wang is familiar with the water pollution prevention law, and in that law, there's a provision that requires factories to install kind of this automatic monitoring equipment that would automatically send information to the environmental protection bureaus.
一些排放大气污染物的工厂，现在环保局也要求它装那个自动监测仪。
With respect to air pollution, the EPB is also 是规定的吗？就一定要吗？还是
对环保局要求的，但是它那个法律里头还没有。
So the environmental protection bureaus are trying to require factories to install this automatic reporting equipment, but it's not in the law right now to require it.
但是我据一些技术人员讲，因为这样的自动监测仪也要经常调试，如果你不经常去调试，它监测就不准了。所以呢，好多工厂可能是装了好久，它也不调试，所以呢，你得到的数据可能也是不准确的。
So even these auto reporting systems are problematic because you have to constantly recalibrate them to make sure they're accurate. And he thinks a lot of these situations where they've actually, even if they've installed it, they probably haven't recalibrated in a long time, and the data is likely to be fairly inaccurate.
那么对工厂的排放污染物的信息呢，国家环保总局有一个规定，就是那些严重污染的那个工厂要公布他们污染的信息，但是现在不是要求所有的工厂都公布他们排污的信息。
So right now there's only a requirement that certain significantly polluting enterprises publicly announce their pollution levels, but there's no requirement that all factories.
所以现在要在中国得到企业的排放污染物的真实信息还是比较困难的。
So it's still quite difficult to get actual data on emissions from factories in China now.
I mean, the World Bank has their Green Watch program, but that's just mainly in Jiangsu and it's going national, but it's color coded, so it's not. And there was no public, education campaign to it, but again, there's like these beginning steps. Last question, Xi Huang.
Okay, I'm Xi Huang from NYU School of Medicine. Actually, I have to say that I work in the Department of Environmental Medicine. And in Professor Xu's talk, you mentioned about lack of medical research organizations or medical experts in environmental protection. That comes to our expertise. And we develop a lot of air sample collectors, so we can collect individual personal air exposure data. We can measure exposure biomarkers. For example, we can collect human blood specimens. Then if it's exposed to, for example, chromium, we can measure the chromium level in the blood. And many other chemicals. Then we develop disease biomarker. We can link and we know the mode of action of chemicals. So we can really prove a cause-effect relationship between exposure and disease. I don't have any questions, but just let you know that we can help in that aspect.
你自己反例好不好？
我
你自己反例告诉他。
OK， 我是很高兴，就是说能够参加你们的这个讲座。我在纽约大学医学院环境医学系做教授。那我们系里的专长就是在环境医学，我们可以就是说发展那种暴露指标，比方说你如果要是暴露在某一个化学环境污染物质，我们可以把它测出来，因为我们知道它的作用机制，所以我们可以证明它有这个cause effect。I don't know how to say in Chinese 。因果关系有因果关系 ，Yeah。诸如此类的事情，如果你需要我们帮忙的话，我们可以帮忙。
So yet again, the matchmaking function, the China Environment Forum.
I'm very glad I made this trip.
Yeah, he came down from New York. So
但问题是你上中国监测局，当地政府就不让你去。
这个我们可以把 air sample collector 放到他们的包里面，他们不知道的。
Let's not do this on microphone. Okay.
你做一些那个个体的检查吗？就是受害者健康的，就是个体的检查和空气环境的监测都做。
他跟我们一起吃午饭。
Okay.
Okay. He's got